For a while, Francis was alone. He recruited no one and founded nothing. He walked the roads, rebuilt small churches with his own hands, served the lepers, and spoke to ordinary people in the squares. Yet something began to stir, and the first man to move was the last one anyone would have predicted. Not a beggar, not a desperate man with nothing to lose, but one of the wealthiest citizens of Assisi, Bernard of Quintavalle. Bernard was a nobleman who had studied law at Bologna, a careful and respected figure in the town. For some time he had been watching this merchant's son who had thrown everything away, unable to decide whether the man was a dreamer or the real thing. To find out, he put him to the test. He invited Francis to his home, gave him a bed in his own room, and pretended to fall asleep. According to the earliest accounts left by the companions, Bernard watched all night long as Francis knelt motionless, repeating the same few words under his breath, "My God and my all." By morning, Bernard had made up his mind. He wanted to live the same way. But first they wanted to be sure, and they went looking for a sign. They walked to the church of San Niccolò beside the main square of Assisi and asked the priest to open the book of the Gospels at random 3 times to learn how God wished them to live. The first time, the page fell on the words, "If you would be perfect, go, sell what you own and give it to the poor." The second time, "Take nothing for the journey." The third time, "Whoever wishes to follow me must deny himself and take up his cross." 3 openings, 3 sentences saying one and the same thing. Francis turned to Bernard and said that this was their rule. Bernard wasted no time. He sold everything he owned, and in the square of San Giorgio he handed the money out, coin by coin, to the poor, the widows, the orphans, the pilgrims. Tradition fixes that day as the 16th of April in the year 1208. Bernard was the firstborn, the first of the brothers. He later led the friars in Spain and died around 1241, buried close to Francis. A rich man who had everything, educated and honored, chose of his own free will to keep nothing. This was no fairy tale but a fact, and it caused a stir in the town. Alongside Bernard in those very first days came the second, Peter Cattani. He too was a man of learning, a jurist, a canon of the Cathedral of San Rufino, an expert in law. The man of the law left the law behind. It sounds like a detail, but it tells us a great deal. The first to follow Francis were not the lowest of society, but people with careers ahead of them. Peter would carry enormous weight. Years later, Francis named him his vicar, the head of the order in his place, saying, "From today I am dead to you, here is Peter Cattani, whom we all must obey." Peter died soon after, on the 10th of March in 1221, at the Portiuncula. The third companion was the exact opposite of the first 2. Giles was neither a nobleman nor a scholar. He was a peasant from the countryside around Assisi, barely 18 years old, and he could not read. On the feast of St. George, the 23rd of April, he went looking for Francis and found him in the woods near the Portiuncula. The first thing Francis asked of him was to give his own cloak to a poor man passing by, and Giles did it without a word. Francis told the others that God had sent them a good companion. The life of Giles shows, better than any sermon, how these men truly lived in those years. He worked with his hands, weaving baskets, helping farmers in the fields, laboring in the kitchens of the monasteries that sheltered him, sharpening knives, digging graves when needed. And in the Holy Land at Acre, he earned his bread by carrying water and selling it. When work ran short, he begged, but he never touched money. He was also a tireless pilgrim, traveling to the tomb of St. James at Compostela, to Jerusalem, to the shrines of St. Michael on Monte Gargano and St. Nicholas at Bari. Francis called him the Knight of our Round Table. In old age, he withdrew to the hill of Monte Rapido above Perugia, into a life of contemplation and ecstasy, and his words, gathered by the friars in his sayings, would be read for centuries. He died in 1262. Together, these first companions lived in a handful of poor shelters, at first in an abandoned hovel at Rivetorto below Assisi, then around the Portiuncula. They owned nothing, worked for their food and begged when it fell short, kept serving the lepers and slept wherever they could. Under the same rough gray tunic stood a nobleman, a lawyer, and a peasant, and among them it no longer mattered who you had been. In a world rigidly divided by birth and wealth, this was the newest thing of all. The meaning of this beginning lies there. 3 men so different, 2 of them with everything to lose, chose the same road not because a doctrine had convinced them, but because they were drawn to a freedom they saw in Francis and lacked in themselves. Not a party, not a school, but a fellowship of free men who had stopped owning in order to stop being afraid. In the next chapter, this small fellowship, now grown to 11 or 12, makes a bold decision to go to Rome before the Pope and ask that their way of life be recognized.